Heard me say this many times, but my comments are not related essentially to the present. I'm not embarrassed to remind viewers again across Australia of the appalling treatment received by Peta Credlin when she was the Chief of Staff to Tony Abbott. Now the public are seeing why Abbott and Credlin, and remember this, not only defeated the Labor Party in a landslide, but in 2 federal elections took 25 seats from Labor. Never, ever done in the history of politics in this country. The way both of them have been treated is a source of public shame. And there is a massive group of people within the Liberal Party who don't forget. On Victoria, Peta's a Victorian, she's a lawyer, and she doesn't cop humbug. As a result, we've seen her forensic dismemberment of the Andrews government. Make Peta Credlin leader of the opposition in Victoria tomorrow, and it's all over. But make no mistake, people do suffer from anger fatigue. They're so fed up with what's going on in Victoria, and they're tired of people talking about it, and they want to turn the page. But there is still a story to be told in the interests of public administration and justice. The Victorian crisis was summed up brilliantly at the weekend when Peta Credlin wrote, quote, "If Jennifer Coate were trying to let the Premier off the hook for more than 800 deaths, tens of thousands of lost jobs and billions of dollars in economic damage, she could hardly have contrived things better." Let's go to Peta. Peta, thank you for your time again. You rightly wrote that Andrews is hoping the reopening of shops and restaurants will wipe away memories of why 5 million Melbourne people had to endure 4 months of house arrest. He's flagging that international travel will come back to Victoria before Christmas. What, to wear a mask 24 hours a day? How can the Coate interim report next Friday have any validity when, as you say, a stack of evidence hasn't been heard?
Well, it can't, Alan. There were 5 subcontractors used by Unified Security. I've spoken to 2. Those 2 never spoke in evidence to the Coate Inquiry. Indeed, what they tendered in evidence, one of them tendered 500 pages, was not formally available publicly. It was received into the hearings book, but it wasn't tendered. So I don't think they can have any plausible path to reopening Victoria safely without getting to the bottom, really, of what went wrong.
So these people, you're saying, in charge of security have never been called as witnesses, even though they provided statements and documents?
And they're not guards. We're talking about people who operated the big security firms. Yep. So Unified Security had the head contract. It was a fixed contract, very unusual, for $30 million. And it had 5 major subcontracting firms under it. It had the lion's share of the work. It didn't actually have many of its own people. It subcontracted it out. Well, I've spoken to 2 of those subcontractors. They never gave evidence to Coate. They put paperwork in. The paperwork was never made public. I smell a rat.
Do we know why the lion's share of the hotel quarantine work was given to a private security firm that wasn't on the preferred provider list?
No satisfactory explanation. And as I wrote in The Australian this afternoon, there was a bit of breaking news, and it'll be in the paper tomorrow. The contract that was signed or executed, I mean, the contract was on foot the night they were there on the very first night, but 4 or 5 days later, in April, when the contract is formally signed and executed, there's a whole series of emails buried in the back of evidence that have come out in just the last 24 hours that show that the person inside Simon Femister's office, this is the Secretary of the Department, he is putting the signature, electronic signature of Femister on there, asking questions. I'm really uncomfortable about this. It must be a lot of money. I don't know what the sum is. It was 30 million. And saying we can't keep doing this. Like, we can't, without some verbal authority that he's happy for us to do this contract. And he's witnessing that he's signing a contract, or Femister signing it in his presence. Of course, it doesn't happen. So I'd argue, at law, it's an invalid contract for $30 million.
But isn't it true that another company linked to the majority owner of the security outfit, David Millward, had previously gone into administration owing creditors millions of dollars?
2.
Yeah.
2 companies. And yet 2 companies.
That's it. 2 companies. And yet this firm, United Security, got a $30 million contract on the basis of, you say, quote, a few phone calls and text messages over several hours on the morning of Saturday, March 28th.
You're absolutely right. It's a Unified Security. There was another mob called United Security, but you're right, Unified Security, absolutely. And you know what's really interesting? That phrase you just used about text messages and, you know, that was put to the people involved in the weekend's contract by one of their own Jobs Department officials. And I think this is a very straight official on the Tuesday, belling the cat, saying, look, I know we're in a hurry on the weekend, but we've basically broken all the probity rules. I'm really concerned there's risks in this contract that we can't mitigate, and we've got to seriously look at unwinding it. Now, that person no longer works in the Jobs Department.
But didn't the Jobs Department...
And it was forced through.
Didn't the Jobs Department say there were probity problems? Didn't the Jobs Department say there were red flags and no one took any notice?
Yeah, well, this is what I'd call an honest public servant who turned up 2 or 3 days after the contract was already on foot. Now, that was before it was formally executed and signed, but it's all pushed through. Every time someone has flagged this contract, it is pushed through.
Right.
Now,
Okay.
you've got to ask why it's pushed through.
OK, now, one thing that's clear, Daniel Andrews knew nothing about this? Nothing about this. I mean, the Coate Inquiry never grilled the Jobs Department head about who authorised the deal. Unified Securities Millwood never gave testimony under oath. The Jobs Department officer involved in the contract never appeared as a witness. The inquiry never called a number of other private security subcontractors associated with United who could have testified as to how the money was handled and how the quarantine was run. And then the failure to call the Premier's Chief of Staff. Failure to seek fund
And what
records.
about the Minister? What about the Minister of the Jobs Department? The Minister of the Jobs Department, Martin Pakula, when he's asked on oath about this contract, he says, I never knew about it, the firm or the sum, until about, July or August, he says.
Well, Peter, just tell us, I mean, the Premier and the former Health Minister haven't been recalled. Jenny Mikakis resigned, saying she strongly disagreed with Andrew's sworn testimony. As I'm sitting here talking to you tonight, where is this heading? I mentioned at the beginning, people do get anger fatigue, don't they, in all of this? And you're urging people...
And I get that. You know, I get that. I have lived this lockdown for everybody in Melbourne. I understand that. I have lived every single day of this lockdown.
So as I talk to you...
I wish I wasn't having to talk about this.
No, we must.
You know what, actually?
We must.
You know, what upsets me the most is I can see a crook government, right? But I always hope that the justice system will hold unchecked power to account. And what I fear here, Alan, is that's not happening. We can't have affidavits. We can't have more legal statements here. We must have witnesses in the box. Recall the ones that have been there before and new ones too. Good on you. Not while you're around will we be denied justice, I can tell you. You're wonderful. Thank you for tonight. Talk to you soon. There she is, Peta Credlin. Lovely to be with you. You too. Bye-bye. Peta Credlin.